Welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining us. Thanks for being part of our community as well. My name is Valen Kolika, and I'll be your host for today. A few reminders before we start. If you have issues viewing the stream at any time during this presentation and you're using the web browser version of Teams, please refresh your browser. If you're using the desktop app of Teams, please exit and rejoin. This just simply seems to resolve the connection issues with our platform. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and will be shared publicly. We will post the recordings on our community at aka.ms/security-webinars. Closed captions in several languages are available during the live broadcast, and you can enable them by clicking on the CC button located at the lower right corner of your screen. Please feel free to ask questions at any time by typing them in the live event Q&A window, simply by clicking on the Ask a Question button. Be aware that any questions you post will be publicly visible. However, if you prefer, you can post your question anonymously, and you can do so by checking the box right below where you enter it. Now, we often get many questions on these webinars, and we will do our best to respond to all of them in real time. In the event if the answer was not provided, or if you may have additional questions post this event, please don't hesitate to raise them on Azure Purview forum at aka.ms/Azure Purview community. If you're listening to this after the fact as a recording, that's also a great place to ask a question. We love to hear your feedback on how we can improve on these webinars, and you can do so at aka.ms/security webinar feedback. And by the way, all the links that I'm announcing have been already shared with you on the chat or the live event Q&A window. Also, I would like to invite you to join our public community by visiting us at aka.ms/security community. That's the best way to ensure that you don't miss any future webinars or major announcements. On our community, you can speak directly to our engineering teams that create our security products. You'll be able to influence our product designs and get early access to changes by doing things like participating in private previews, which, by the way, you can sign up for at aka.ms/security-prp. In there, you can request the features, give feedback, review our product roadmaps, register for events, or join webinars like this. We simply believe that the best way to improve our products is by removing any barriers between you and the people that create them. So we hope you'll join us. And just to remind you, for the listeners, that about a month ago, we updated you all that instead of the Better Together story that we were going to do for Azure Security Center and Azure Purview, and instead, in today's session, Ajay, Karanam will go over the end-to-end sensitivity label flow from Microsoft 365 to Azure Purview, as well as SQL to Power BI. Ajay is a senior program manager with our cloud security team focusing on Azure Purview. And without further ado, I'll turn it over to him. Ajay, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. Like Van said, my name is Ajay, and we're going to talk about the end-to-end sensitivity label flow from M365 to Azure Purview and through the data sources SQL, Power BI, and further. We will today in this session, we'll talk about how there is no control over where our data travels. We could create the data, but then it could either transform or it could migrate or move, travel to different places. And then we'll talk about sensitivity labels, how they can help us with this problem. And we'll talk about how these labels are in the M365 ecosystem, which is the office space like the Excel, PowerPoint, Word, and all those, and a lot more documents types, and then how these labels can help or how they are used in Azure Purview. Then we'll talk about how you can secure your data using your labels, basically a solution to the problem we discussed, and then we'll go through a demo. So during any of the initial portions, if you're worried like, hey, I don't understand what you're showing me sort of a thing, just wait for the demo. The demo is hands-on, and I'm going to show every single thing that I talk about through the PowerPoint presentation in the demo. So you should get a clear picture when we look at the demo. And if you still don't understand, definitely ask a question in the chat, and my colleagues can help, or we can follow up after the webinar. All right. So like I said, there is no control over where data travels. Data migrates. Imagine having an on-premise SQL server, and given all the migrations to the cloud, you could be migrating your on-premise SQL server to Azure SQL Database, or maybe you suddenly want to move it to a data warehouse so that you could create some insights on top of it, or you want to move it to a Cosmos DB. So data migrates among all these different data sources, and data also transforms. So on your SQL database, if you want to create a Power BI report, then the data transforms into a Power BI data set. And then if a user downloads the data from the Power BI report into an Excel file, then it's in a totally different format. And then it could go into PDF and various other formats. So data either migrates or transforms, and with little or no control over where data travels. So when that is the case, wouldn't it be great if you could automatically know where your sensitive data is, know what sensitive data you have? Like, for example, in your SQL database, do you have a credit card number? Do you have social security number, customer IP address, phone numbers? Like what sensitive data you have. And also, it would be great if you could protect that data, right? Like protect not just from outsiders, but also from people inside the company who don't necessarily need to see that information, right? Make sure it's solid and tight. And then you also want to monitor your data, maybe like create alerts to tell you the, hey, somebody who doesn't have access is trying to access social security numbers. You get an alert. Isn't that important? So these are all the things that we're going to talk about a little bit today. So let me introduce you to sensitivity labels. Some of you may already know this if you're an M365 customer. If you're not, then sensitivity labels are just tags that you can apply on assets to classify and protect your data. And both M365 and Azure Purview provide us a way to automatically apply these labels based on the sensitive data in your asset. So like if your SQL database has a social security number, and then you can go create labels to say, hey, if you find social security number or credit card number, please call that asset highly confidential. That's the label name that you give. And these systems or services have the capability to essentially scan your database and say, yeah, I found social security number. I'm going to call you highly confidential, just like you said. And that label is what tells you what type of sensitive data you have. And you can apply these labels to files and database columns. And whatever labels you apply, it travels with the data. So we are working through a wide number of data sources. Today, we'll talk about what is already there, what we have completed working on, and there are some future releases we are looking at. And after these labels are applied, you can enable protection actions. We'll talk about some of the protection actions we have already enabled, we have released, like encryption, content marking, and things like that. And then you could also create alerts based on these labels applied. We are currently actively working on it. It's not out there for you to consume yet, but the fundamental of the foundation is there. Like sensitivity labels can be used to create alerts in the future. So now let's talk about labels in the M365 space, also sometimes referred to as MIP. Labels in the M365 space, or M365 sensitivity labels, or Microsoft information protection labels, are the one Microsoft labels. They are like labels for all Microsoft ecosystems. So the Office documents recognize the labels, Power BI documents recognize it, Teams and SharePoint sites recognize it, and Azure Purview for all the Azure assets. So a wide variety of platforms within Microsoft today recognize it, and we also have some external partners whose applications recognize this. So these labels can essentially be used as a foundation for all the things I mentioned earlier. So in the M365 ecosystem, you could create and manage these labels. So it is like a portal where you would create. We'll take a look at it, both screenshots and a live demo in a little bit. And labels can be applied to files and emails within the M365 ecosystem. After you apply these labels, you can do things like access control. You can choose who can see the label, who can even see the document. And then you can choose whether that document is encrypted or not. And then you can choose whether you want to add content marking things, like show something in the background to say this is, whatever background on the Word document or PowerPoint documents. And you can also extend these labels to Azure Purview, Power BI. Like I said, this is for all the ecosystems. So this is a screenshot of what sensitivity labels in M365 looks like. We'll look at a live one a little bit later, but you'll see that there is an information protection section within the M365 Compliance Center, and this is where you manage the labels. And labels can either be just a single label, or you can even create sub labels. So this is like a hierarchy. And labels can be extended to just files and emails, or you can extend it to Purview, other sections and things like that. And note this order. Order is essentially what tells which is the most important one. The highest number or the highest order is the most important one. So most important in the sense that is the one we apply depending on whether the rules match or not, which is something we'll look at in a second. So extending labels to Purview. So as you can see, you can choose where your labels show up. And if you choose Azure Purview assets, then you can extend the labels to Azure Purview. Auto labeling rules. So this is the part where you tell the service or system that, hey, if you find credit card number or driver license or social security number, then call me secret. You can apply the label secret if you find these three. So then the system is always looking for those within documents or databases and then says, hey, I found this. Let me call this particular content highly confidential or secret, whatever label name you give it. So now let's talk about labels in Azure Purview. Once we do this, then we will talk about how these two combine to help us with securing our data. Azure Purview is a unified data governance service. At the center of Azure Purview, there is data map, which helps you automate and manage metadata at scale. And then there's data catalog on top of it, which is sort of like a user experience that allows you to view all the data you have, the metadata you have for all the assets. And you can do a wide variety of things where you can register and scan new assets. You can look at labels. You can look at classifications that were found. There is also data insights, which are canned reports, which shows you, hey, based on all the assets that you have scanned till date, here are the classification insight or asset insights, label insights, glossary insights. So we show a wide variety of reports on what your data estate looks like. So Azure Purview provides you all this once you set it up. And also Azure Purview supports not just on-premise or Azure, it also supports multi-cloud, which includes AWS and GCP. So applying labels in Purview, let's talk about that. So when you first come to an Azure Purview, first create an Azure Purview account, the first thing you would do is register an asset. What that means is you add your asset to the Azure Purview account. And once you do that, the next thing you do is you scan your asset. So the system basically runs a scan on your asset and looks for sensitive information. And based on the sensitive information it found, it says, hey, I found these 5 sensitive information, or as we call it, classifications. So the classifications could be social security number, credit card number, person's email address, personal IP address, things like that. And based on the classifications found and the label settings that you have defined earlier in the M365 portal, we will apply labels to it. Once you have applied labels, all the insights like the classification and label insights will start populating now. So this is what applying a label looks like. So here, this is a Microsoft SQL column, which has a label highly confidential and Purview test, and it was applied based on a social security number that was found on that particular column. Benefits of having Purview labeling. So it gives you an overview of your data estate with sensitivity label pivot. So you can see based on data sensitivity, what type of data do you have, how many of those assets do you have, and a lot more other details. We'll look at that in a little bit. And then you can transfer, you can get the benefit of data, the label traveling with the data. So if you apply a label to your data and the data migrates or transforms like we talked about at the start, then the label travels with it. And using that label, like I mentioned earlier, you can protect it with actions like encryption. And also you can create alerts. These two are in a future release. The protection for Word, Excel, PowerPoint, all the M365 documents is already there, but we are working on encryption for databases and also alerts in a future release. So this is what the insights look like. So I'm showing you the sensitivity label insights, and you can see it tells you that across 7 subscriptions, and you have 8 unique labels that you have created, and all the different labels that were applied and how many of them were applied on files and tables. And you can click on view more, and you can actually go to the asset name and all the other details that you want to look at. So now let's talk about the scenario that we initially started, where we said there is no control over the data. So let's take an example. Let's say you have a SQL database, and within that there is a SQL table, and one of the columns has a credit card number. I'm going to call it CCN for now. And let's say this credit card number is in the SQL column. And somebody, one of the analysts within your company, created a Power BI report. When the Power BI report pulls the data, so will the credit card number flow into the Power BI report. And let's say there are a bunch of users to the Power BI report, and one of them downloaded that into an Excel file. Then the credit card number will automatically flow from the Power BI report into the Excel file. So whatever sensitive data you have in a SQL table, given that as your company grows or as more people start using this wonderful SQL database that you have put together, the data will flow. And there is no control over where this sensitive data goes. If you give access to somebody, it's most likely that they're pulling all the information for their Power BI reports. And especially with certain abilities within Power BI to be able to analyze in Excel or download as a PDF, all the export capabilities it has, there's a good chance that people may get all the sensitive data, not just what you want them to really use. So how do you label and protect your data? So initially, let's start with creating a label. Let's create a label called secret, and we will tell the system, hey, if you find credit card numbers in any of my data sources, whether it is a SQL database or Word documents or Excel or whatever, if you find credit card number, call it secret. And then we will tell the system to extend it to Purview. It is by default extended to the M365 ecosystem. So in here, we are telling it to extend it to Purview. Then you go to Purview and you scan the SQL database. When you scan the SQL database, you are essentially scanning the SQL table as well as a part of it, and you would find the credit card number. And the credit card number automatically tells the system, hey, because you found the credit card number and you told me to create this label called secret and apply it, I'm going to apply that label to the SQL column which had the credit card information. And once you do that, whenever somebody creates a Power BI report using that SQL table, the label secret will now flow into the Power BI report. And then when the user of a Power BI report downloads it into an Excel file, the label will then flow into the Excel file. So you may ask, like, hey, yeah, great, the label is flowing. What do I do with it? You can then also in the label create security, right? Like you can create encryption. You can say, hey, this data is very sensitive. Why don't you encrypt it? And you say people who have access to these is only a subset of people. And you add like a small group, security group saying only these people have access. And when you enable that, that protection goes wherever the data goes. And the security that you're applying on this specific part of a SQL table, for example, only enables the security in a sense where the customer cannot, or the person who's trying to access the data cannot see the actual data, but they can still access the overall asset. So if I'm writing a query on this table, you can still write a query, but the results for that particular column will look like garbage, will look like some random data, which doesn't look, the actual data doesn't come out. So it's essentially, it's not breaking any of your system. But it still works and protects your data. So let's take a look at a live demo. This is the M365 Compliance Center, and there is a section called Information Protection. Click on Information Protection here, and then you'll go to the labels. So you can create new labels, and once you create them, you'll have to publish them. That is a key aspect of this. And then let's look at some of the labels that I already have, and I'll run you through this label called secret. I have already created, and it shows it's active for files, emails, and Purview assets. So let's look at what a label has. Initially, you would give it a name and a description. And then you would tell it, hey, I want to extend this particular label to files and emails and Azure Purview assets. And then you can choose to encrypt. I'm going to select mark content for files to just show you what it looks like. And depending on what you select, this particular section pops up, and you can see I have configure encryption settings, and I'm assigning permissions right now, which means whatever permissions I set in this label is who will have access to data encrypted by this label. And right now I'm saying only this particular account, which I'm using to log into this compliance center, is the one who has access to this data as well. And then content marking, you can add a watermark, you can add a header, add a footer. So all of these you can do with the labels. And auto labeling essentially is what we discussed earlier. It tells if you find credit card number with high confidence, and even if you find one instance of it in any of my data, then call it secret. And this is for the files and emails. And now we will go to the Azure Purview assets, and here in Azure Purview assets, these are the auto labeling rules for database columns. And I'm using the exact same ones, saying if you find credit card number or EU debit card number, then call it secret. And then I just review all this and publish it. For now, I'm going to cancel it because I already have the label set up. So the label is created. Everything is ready to go. And now let's go to a SQL database, which I'll show you. I have this SQL database. I have a bunch of data in it, and particularly one of this table. Sorry. Okay, particularly one of this table has a bunch of customer information that includes first name, last name, email address, IP address, and credit card number. There's a lot of sensitive information in this, but I particularly care about the credit card number being in plain text. Don't worry, this is just fake numbers if you're trying to copy it. So this is sensitive information, and we want to protect this data, right? Like we want to make sure when this data is out there, not everybody can copy this around or take it around. And so let's go to Azure Purview Studio. So Azure Purview, like explained earlier, has a wide variety of things that you can do here. Let's start with registering the source. So if you go to
Ajay, sorry to interrupt. If you don't mind, just zooming in a little bit more into the demo part. Sure. And if you there's a request, if you can review the secrets where you were configuring and applying, that would be great.
Sorry, in the secrets, as in like the label?
Yes, we're
go over the label one more time. Is that what you're saying?
They were wondering if they're configured and applied. Were they already configured and applied on the secret part?
Oh, did I already apply them? Yes, most of them take time. Like I cannot do them live. Yeah, makes so sense. This is a label I had already created in advance. That is correct. If I create a label right now, there is a 12-hour wait time, and even with scanning takes like 6 to 10 minutes. So all of these steps take time. So I'm just going to show you things that I've already set up, but I'll show you most of the details. So did you want me to run through this label again? Is that what you're saying? Well,
no, I think that's good enough. And thank you so much. Didn't mean to interrupt, but seems like there was a ask for that. Thank you so much.
Okay, all right. Okay, so once we go into Purview, so you can come here and you can register your assets. So when I click register, we support a bunch of data sources today, and we keep adding them as time goes by. We are working on a lot more. And once we have tested them to work efficiently, then we will add them here. But for now, what we support is all of these Azure data sources like Cosmos DB, Azure Data Lake, Gen 1, Gen 2. We also have SQL Database, Azure SQL Database, and Managed Instance. And also we support other databases like Oracle, SQL Server, Teradata, Metadata, and then Power BI, and then SAP HANA, and also Amazon S3 is here. So we continue to add all of these, and you can register. You can essentially click, for example, in my case where I had Azure SQL Database or a SQL Database, SQL Server, I can just select that and I can say continue. And you would provide certain information, the server endpoint, and then you would just add it to the system. In our case, I already created a database called Ninja, which is what we were looking at earlier. So this is the Ninja SQL database, which we were looking at. And I have already run scans, one of them yesterday. So it shows that I ran a scan yesterday and it found 27 assets, which is a bunch of tables and views within that particular SQL table. We looked at all that here, right? All of these it's scanned. And I'll show you what a scan looks like, right? So let's go back a second and let me show you what a scan means. So when you first register an asset, you want to do a new scan because you wouldn't have any of the existing scans. So when you click a new scan, it asks you certain information. It says, hey, which database are you trying to scan? And I would select that. And this credentials and everything I've already set up in advance, but you will have to add those. But once you do, you click continue. And then using the credentials, it pulls all the information. So I was telling you it found 27 assets. So here they are. All of these are in the database that we were looking at earlier, and particularly this one that we care about. It pulled all of these tables and it is going to run some scan rules. So this is the default system default rules. There are some customized ones that I've created, but for now, I'll show you like the Azure SQL database. You can just run the system default, and the system default ones will look for all the credit card, social security, and all the ones that we were talking about earlier. And then you click continue and you can choose whether you want to run this on a regular basis or if you want to just run it once. And once you provide all this information, you can continue and click scan. And it will just go ahead and kick off the scan. Did I not zoom in on this? So let me show you. So let me show you the scan. Like I said, I did the scan yesterday. And once you do some of these scans, you can always run them. There is a concept called incremental scan, which helps you just look for changes, new data that came in, new columns or things like that. But I ran the scan and I found these many assets. Great. So now that I have found the classifications, let's go look for the table that we were talking about. Let's search for sales data. Okay, it should not take that much time. It's frozen. Oh. Okay, there you go. So, all right, we'll give it a second for it to load. So the Purview also has all of these different things that you can see. The home is where we looked at all the different functionalities. And here are the data sources that we were looking at, what data sources are in the system. And then you also have insights here. And then you have glossary here. And then you also have a management center where you can manage all of these different labels. Oh, wonderful. Turn back. The search functionality is actually quite powerful. I wonder why it is so slow this morning. All right. So the sales data, when we search for it, we got two results. Let's look at the first one, which is our Azure table. And when I click on it, I go to the Azure table that we were looking at earlier. And as you can see, the sales data is a Azure SQL table. And I found all these different classifications, credit card number, email address, person's name, IP address. And if you remember, we looked at all of this data earlier in our SQL table in the other tab, and all of these were found as a part of the scanning. And it also, based on these classifications, because we only have the secret label, it says, hey, the only label I know is for the credit card number, and I'm going to call it secret right here. So if you go to that credit card number, then essentially it will tell you it's an Azure SQL column and it is marked as secret, and because it found classification. And you can also see it is from a particular SQL database, the server name, and it sort of gives you all that information. And now let's go back to the sales data. And remember, we had two results. You could wonder why, because like I only have a sales data table and this doesn't have the name sales data or anything. It's because the Power BI report has the connection to the sales data. It is using the data from the sales data, and you can look at that in lineage. Under lineage, it tells you, hey, this particular report is created off of Purview Ninja SQL. And because it is using the sales data table, it is essentially coming up in the search results. And let's look at this particular Power BI report. So we applied a label secret, right? Let's go to this particular thing and let's see, show the tables. And as you can see, it is using the tables sales data, and it is using that credit card number in the report. So our sensitive data is out there. So let's go look at this report and see whether it is protected or not. As you can see, the label secret is applied right here. And we will now look at the functionality within the Power BI dashboard, where you can download a PDF or analyze it in Excel. I'll click the PDF one, which takes a little bit of time to download. I'll let that continue, and let's look at the export and analyze in Excel. Oh, really? Right, so we are downloading the Excel, downloading the Power BI data into an Excel, and here it will essentially give me a pop-up saying like, hey, you need to log in to this particular account for you to use the same account for you to look at the data. Otherwise, it will not let me do that. The PDF, I believe the PDF file is open. And if I go to the PDF file, it essentially tells me, hey, you have to switch in the browser setting. But let's go look at it in the PDF reader. There is a reader integration which helps us do it in a better way. So if I double click open this, it's because I have logged in and opened this before. So it looks like it is. Right. So in other words, so essentially when I created this Power BI file, it's protected and it's showing that that particular data has the secret label, and wherever the data goes, the data is all labeled. So you remember, like, we did not do anything to label this particular Power BI report, but because the data in the SQL database was labeled, the Power BI report also got labeled, and the Excel file is also labeled, and also the PDF file will be labeled. So everything essentially gets this label, and the protection is passed down for wherever the encryption is supported. That's all I have for today, and we can take questions now.
Thank you. Great, Ajay. Although the team has done a great job here answering the questions, wanted to see if there's anything the team would like to share with us for something that was not answered. Actually, hold on a second. I think we have just one coming in, new one. Okay, are alerts and notifications part of a roadmap, and what will they, or I guess when will they be GA'd? So this is a public community webinar. My suggestion that for any roadmaps, or unless you want to share something that is non-NDA, IJ, that's fine. But our private preview forum, that's the program where we share more of the roadmap communication. But please go ahead, IJ, if you have anything to share.
No, I was going to say the same thing. I think I would request any customers who are interested to sign up for the private preview of Azure Purview, and whatever is available, you can see there. Yes, we are working on the alerts, but we don't have a release date yet. We will announce that when we are ready with the feature. But yes, monitoring is a part of something we are working on.
Great, thank you. And somebody's asking for the slides. Yes, they will be uploaded, the deck and the recording, at our usual place under the aka.ms security webinars. And I was going to actually mention this because that was a very valuable slide that you have there with some great Azure Purview resources. So please, folks, check it out. And let me see if we have any more coming, any new questions. Lori has a great point here. She posted, if you would like to suggest or upvote feature requests to visit the Purview feedback site, that's a great one. And okay, so we have a couple more coming. Let me just read them out. Are database exports also going to be labeled somehow?
Database exports. So if database export is happening to, so we are working on certain scenarios. So this goes scenario by scenario. There's no like, hey, wherever it goes, go ahead, apply the label. We could apply the label, but not all the target data sources would understand. So for example, if you take SQL, if the data is exported from SQL to Synapse or Cosmos DB or an Excel file, all these will understand the label. And that is something where we have already worked on, and they understand the labels. The protection of that, we are working on it. Like if you apply labels in a SQL database, and those label that goes to any other place other than the Power BI report, like for example, Synapse or Cosmos, or like in the future, say Oracle or whatever. We are working actively on individual scenarios, and the scenarios that I showed you today, where it goes from SQL to Power BI report, then to an Excel file, that is something we have already finished. But other scenarios we're actively working on, and our goal is to make sure no matter where data travels, both within all the Microsoft data sources and eventually to external ones like Oracle or any other Teradata or like the MySQL, wherever it goes, we want to attach the label with it and a protection with it. And whether those data sources support unencrypting or decrypting the data is something we will have to work over time.
Thank you for that. I see there's two more coming, and Lori answering one of them, so I'll just tackle the one from Travis. Travis is asking, is the classification only honored when being accessed through specific views, for example, Power BI or Azure Web SQL browser? And the sub question to that is, what about the on-premise SQL data sources?
Good question. So the on-premise SQL databases also honor the Microsoft Information Protection labels. Today, we are able to apply the labels to it, but the setting of the label is done in Azure Purview. We are working on a unified experience where whether you do it in the SQL database or in Purview, you get the exact same experience. So you can go to your SQL database and you can do the exact same thing that we were looking at in the web browser. And you can go there and you can apply the labels, and whatever label you apply, that SQL database will show within SQL itself. That is something we are actively working on. But right now you will have to come to Azure Purview, which is something we were looking at here. And you would come here and you'll have to look at that. Even applying the label is through here. There is a T-SQL way of applying label to your table directly from the SQL database, but it doesn't have any UI. along with it. So we are currently working on providing that and making it as unified with this experience as we can.
Great. Thank you. And I don't see any new questions coming in, so I'll move forward on wrapping this up. Thank you so much, AJ, for this Better Together story you shared here with us today. And thanks for the rest of the team who help answering the questions. In case we missed to answer your question, or if you have additional questions, you can you visit the Azure Purview forum in tech community. And the short link for that is aka.ms/Azure Purview community. I would also like to remind the listeners that the best way to ensure that you don't miss any future webinars or major announcements to please visit our landing page at aka.ms/security community. And while you're there, you'll find easy ways to navigate and find the resources and learning content relevant to our security products and their communities. I think a good start would be just simply by browsing through some of the bite-sized product videos that we have, the Ninja trainings, recording of the past webinars. That's also a great resource. Also, all the GitHubs that the product communities have. We'd love to hear your feedback on how we can improve on these webinars. So please take a minute submitting your feedback at aka.ms/security webinar feedback. Thank you, all of you, for being part of our community and for joining us on these webinars. You have a good rest of the day. Goodbye.